here, so one computer's better than two.
Okay,
Let me just make sure this is.
it's really special to be here. Am I okay? Can people hear me?
Sure.
Yeah.
I assume someone would.
Exactly. They would have said something by now.
Right. The worst is when you don't have anyone on Zoom and you're recording and then you don't realize.
Exactly.
Should be good.
Yeah.
Loud and clear, all good.
Oh, good. Hello. Thank you.
That was your.
Um,
Thanks, Shoshana. I can always count on you.
It's very special to be here. First of all, to reconnect with old friends, and in particular, as I was talking about before, with Melissa, one of my best friends is Jen Tobin, married to Mark's brother Scott, and over the years, because of all the family, Baruch Hashem, family smachot and family occasions, I got to know Dodi through them and through my work at Matan. And she is sorely missed, and it is really an honor to be here, to be part of this program in her memory. And thank you for inviting me. And I feel it's particularly, I've had numerous conversations with Mark about Emunah and Tefillah, and I know how important a topic this is to them. And so I hope that this small shir can just be a little part of remembering how important that is for them. Okay, so there's so much to talk about with Tefillah, but I've sort of found my way into tonight's topic through the work I'm doing this year. I'm part of this Matan Kitvuni Fellowship, which they keep asking me to mention so that people know about it. It's a wonderful program that Matan started last year. I'm part of the second cohort, where they're giving women the opportunity to write a book of Torah, Sefer Iyun. And the book I'm writing about, I've had a love and a passion, and I taught many years about Midrash and Agadah, particularly Agadah in the Talmud. And so we're going to spend a little time on that today, both because it helps me think about my research, so you'll be helping me, and also because it very much relates to our topic. Our topic is HaMakom, holy space in Tefillah. Appropriately, we're sitting in the Beit Knesset, and so that will certainly play into that. I think this is particularly timely and interesting of a topic for a number of reasons. First of all, Parshat HaShavua, we just finished Sefer Shmot, we've begun Sefer Vayikra, and really almost half, quite a big chunk, right? More than four whole parshas of Sefer Shmot is devoted to thinking about this space, which is talk about holiness of space, the Mishkan, and putting together the Mishkan, and what eventually becomes the basis of the Beit HaMikdash in Judaism. And so it's certainly very appropriate time-wise. We're also now going into the Korbanot and all the ways that the Mishkan operated. It's interesting, though, that of course around the Mishkan, as I'm sure you're all familiar, there's a great machloket about whether it was in fact an optimal thing in Judaism or more of a concession, right? And there's a big debate among the commentaries whether it was a concession due to the sin of the golden calf, and it was really a way and Rambam writes about this, whether it was a way for the people needed some kind of physical space, some kind of experiential way of relating to God, the visual and the experiential. And instead of it, God forbid, going through idolatry, we had the Mikdash to make it possible for them to worship Hashem. And it's something that over time we've managed to wean ourselves off of that need as the world has developed. That's more the perspective of the Rambam. Ramban famously is of the opinion that there is no reason to think that this is the holiest place in Judaism, the place where we can come closest to Hashem, lechatchila, was meant to be. And so therefore it's not in any way a concession. And in fact, in Mukdam Umuchar Torah, we don't have to acknowledge that, we don't have to believe that the sin of the golden calf came before, Yesh Mukdam, right? That we can believe that the command to build the Mishkan happened before the sin of the golden calf. So this is all just by way of introduction to say that this is a very appropriate time to be talking about this topic in our Parsha readings. And this famous machloket we'll see is also at the basis of the sources that we're going to look at today about how important, how central is it to Tefillah for there to be a place, a holy place, a particular place, a place of Kedusha, does that enhance our tefillah? Is that necessary? Of course, another two reasons why this is particularly relevant. Certainly, if I'd given this year 5 years ago, I would have thought very differently about what it means. You know, what is Beit Knesset? And talk about taking things for granted, right? The idea that we'd be locked out of our Bate Knesset for some period of time, and what does it mean that you have a street minyan or a minyan or a bar mitzvah in your backyard, right? Suddenly, do these places take on a different level? What does that mean for our places of tefillah, places of kedusha? So thinking about these sources in a post-COVID world is also, even though we still have COVID, but a safer COVID world is very interesting. Okay, and the final aspect is what we're going to start jumping into now is the idea of the history of what happened in Jewish life, which is that we went from, if you look at the biblical, if you look at Tanakh, the Mikdash, the Mishkan and the Mikdash are an essential part of how we worship Hashem and how we daven and how we relate to Hashem and come close to Hashem. Over time, that faces a tremendous transition. Even though in Tanakh we have voices which are critical of korbanot and corrupt kohanim, we have sources that criticize it. At the same time, it's only in a post-biblical world that we have this transition to a world without korbanot, a world without the mikdash. And so once that's gone, what happens? What happens to this concept of this particular place, this particular makom of kedusha and avodah? So we're going to look at how the sources relate to that, and we're going to see there's some really interesting and incredibly resonant sources for our time as well today in Israel. So we'll begin by jumping into the sources. Source I felt I had to start with is the source, the original source to make the Mishkan, where we hear as follows in source 1, Sefer Shmot. We hear that Hashem commands the people, "Va'asu li mikdash v'shachanti betocham." So Hashem says, "Make for me a mikdash, and I will reside within you." Famously, right? What's going on here? Why are we building the mikdash? Sorry, for us. Interesting. What's your name? Meryl. Great. So we're gonna. So for us, possibly, what makes you think in these words that it's for us? "Va'asu li mikdash." Make me a mikdash, and I will dwell amongst you.
It's you, it's not the building.
Okay, beautiful. So first of all, it's very surprising. You make a mikdash for God to dwell amongst us. Why do we need a building for God to dwell amongst us? Right? So that's already one big question on the verses. And of course, is it for us or is it for God? Could we possibly, Kavayachal, say that we need to build this building for God? And this is, right? No, it doesn't sit well with you, right? On the other hand, that's what it explicitly says, "Asu li mikdash." Why does Hashem need a mikdash, right? Make a mikdash for me, or is that we're making it for Hashem, or are we making it for us? This is very confusing. And I want to also emphasize that the word asu, or can we see at the end of the second verse, v'chen ta'asu, right? We are meant to make this word of asiyah, of doing, is a word we've seen before and is important, and we'll get to that in a moment. And also the word, it's interesting that the Mishkan is first referred to here as the Mikdash, okay? And Rashi explains, and you know, I'm already working on the premise that this place is a place of holiness. And Rashi explains, "Va'asu li mikdash, va'asu lishmi beit kedusha." So first of all, Rashi solves a couple of problems for us. It's not that Hashem needs the temple; it's that the mikdash, the Mishkan, is for my name, right? That people should be more cognizant of the Creator, of Hashem, of the divine in this world, of my name. And also, you're making me Beit Kedusha, Mikdash, Beit Kedusha. The Mikdash is this house of holiness, is this place of holiness. And so we see that already here, there's this a number of things in the words, a number of elements in the words, which give us information about what this holy space is going to do. The Mechilta, the Midrash, Mechilta de Rabbi Yishmael, which is Tannaitic Midrash on the book of Shmot, asks the question that we've just asked. I'll just read it out really quickly in source 2. "Va'asu li mikdash v'shachanti betocham, lama ne'amar, v'halo kvar ne'amar, halo et hashamayim v'ta'aretz ani malei, HaMakom lomar v'asu mikdash shetekabel sachar. So the Midrash, which is the rabbis of the Mishnah, is already asking, why does Hashem, don't think when you read this verse that Hashem needs space. We know from the book of Yirmiyahu that Hashem is not confined by space, right? Hashem is,
When she's song.
right,
Right,
exactly,
Hashem is
exactly. Hashem is here, Hashem is there, Hashem is really everywhere, exactly. In Yeshayahu's words, Hashem takes up the Shemayim and Aretz, Ani Malay, right? How can we talk about Hashem needing to be confined to a space, right? And so when it says Asuli Mikdash, it's not for Hashem, but for us to receive schar. So we see the rabbis themselves are really grappling with this question of what is this? What is the purpose of this space, and who is it for, and how do we make sense of this in terms of theology, both biblical theology and rabbinic theology? And this is just really giving you a taste that they're struggling with these questions. And I think that these are questions with which we really struggle with through today. Now, source 3 point out to us that these words, which are associated with the creation of the Mishkan, the Mikdash, is a direct link to the ultimate creation story. Okay, so Asuli Mikdash, Asiya, and the word Mikdash. Now, the first appearance of these words is in fact in the story of creation. And famously, we find them in the same pasuk in source 3. Vayvarech Elokim et Yom HaShvi'i, God blessed the seventh day. Vaykadesh oto, and sanctified it. Ki vo Shabbat mikom malachto asher bara Elokim la'asot. So hard to translate the ends of this pasuk, but it sounds like which God created for us to do, right? What does this mean? But we see that there's this deep connection in both places, in creation and in the building of the Mishkan, the Mikdash, between Asiya, doing creativity in this world, and Kedusha, holiness. So in the creation story, Shabbat is a time to rest and acknowledge that doing and that holiness associated with it. And now we're going to look a little bit more deeply into the Mishkan and the Mikdash and how that connects to the creation story. Now, I'm sure you're very familiar. We're not going to go through this now, but you're very familiar that there's a lot of literary connections between the building of the Mishkan, right? The building of the Mishkan, many things come up that parallel the creation story, right? The fact that Shabbat appears in both stories, the commands keep Shabbat, the words melacha appear many times, the Ruach Elokim appears. It's the only, I believe, the only two times that phrase appears is in creation and in the Mishkan narrative. And so there's many connections between these stories. And the question is why? What is the Torah trying to convey to us? And there are various theories. The Midrash, modern scholars talk about this, but the Midrash picked up on all of this, right, early on and saw that there's some connection between these stories. And so in order for us to understand more about what's special about the Mishkan, what's special about the Mikdash, we have to also think about, no problem. We also have to think about why it has this connection to the creation story. So I'll give you, just because it's late and, if anyone, do you like to be interactive? I like to be interactive. What have you heard? What have you thought about this connection in the past between why are there so many literary and thematic connections between the building of the Mishkan and the story of creation? What is that? What is the point? It's nice that they're there, but what's the point of that? What is the Torah trying to tell us?
I heard, I'm on the Zoom. Can you hear me?
Yeah, who's that?
Paula.
Paula, hi.
Paula, hi. I think I remember hearing that just as Hashem made the world for us, now we're making this for him, kind of like a parallel, but we have to follow his instruction and his example, but it's like a present to him, like the world was a present to us, something like that.
Okay, beautiful idea. Beautiful idea. Anyone else want to contribute? So there are numerous theories. Modern scholars have talked about the Mikdash being like a microcosm. We are similar to what Paula was saying, that we are in some ways, we are getting in touch with our Tselem Elokim, with the godly aspect, the divine aspect of our humanity when we engage in this kind of creativity. And so there's something very beautiful about that. I want to read to you another idea, which is expressed by Leon Cass. Actually, before I do, I'll mention one other idea, which is that the creation, in the creation narrative, everything what's the state of the world before it's created? Tovavo, complete chaos. Okay, and a lot of what Sefer Breshit, especially in the beginning, is dealing with is combating evil and trying to overcome evil. Okay, for good to overcome evil, for light over dark, for order over chaos. So that's a lot of the theme in the beginning of Breshit. And so one particular academic scholar talks about the Mishkan, the Mikdash, also having this aspect of trying to create seder, trying to create order, trying to enhance goodness in the world, and draw on that aspect of the creation story, which also in our world is a very relevant topic of finding places that for us are places where we can connect with the good, connect with the godly, connect with order when all around us there is evil and disorder. And so that was just an interesting, compelling idea. I'll read with you what Leon Kass writes. Leon Kass is actually a conservative thinker on a number of political issues and societal issues, but he happens to have written 2 books. Has anyone read any of his stuff? He's written 2 books, one on Breshit and one on Shemot, and he comes with these very fresh and interesting perspectives. And he writes as follows in source 4. Whatever else it accomplishes, the tabernacle provides a home for human artfulness, creativity, and the love of splendor. But it does so without encouraging hubris or popular idolatry. It provides a home for the impulse to sacrifice and the search for the ecstatic experience, but without encouraging bloody wildness or abject self-surrender. It embraces work and service without encouraging either the pride of mastery or the abasement of servitude. One of the things I like about what he's doing here is he's bringing up the fact that there, of course, the Mishkan was not in a vacuum. There is this background, real life of what's going on for Bnei Israel in biblical times, in the pagan world in which they are found, right? It's not that we're ignoring that, but he has this incredibly constructive, positive twist on how the Mishkan is an antidote to that around it. He goes on to say that politically, the tabernacle helps unify the people by engaging them in a common building project. To the unity promoted by living under a common law, the tabernacle adds daily religious rituals, which provide unifying experiences that give concrete meaning to the call to become a kingdom of priests and a holy nation. I think this idea has a lot of relevance for Medina Israel today. As I'm teaching, I happen to be teaching Parsha and Matan Sharon, and I'm thinking a lot about the Mishkan in these weeks that we're discussing it in the Parsha, and I see parallels. I see a lot of parallels to Medina Israel and what we have. We have in the Mishkan a lot of this combination of what's required and what's voluntary, right? Trumot that are voluntary and trumot that are required, and korbanot that are voluntary and korbanot that are required. And this combination, right, is something we're seeing in Medina Israel today, that when we are able to come together and be unified, right? We talked about Tzav Shmona, right? Right? This idea that we're being commanded, there was a required call up, and yet we got 130% reserve duty, right? And on top of that, I don't know what it's like here, but in Ra'anana you have like women going around, maybe now it's calmed down, but the people going all over, and people who couldn't serve in the army, finding ways to contribute, right? And they're saying, this is my Tzav Shmona, right? And that language is fascinating because they're saying, I want to give and I want to be part of this. I want to feel I'm part of this Tzav, I'm part of this command, this Misgeret. And so not to say that Medina Israel is the Mishkan, but we can draw some interesting and quite amazing parallels between what the purpose of the Mishkan for the nation politically and what we're experiencing in a positive way together today. Theologically, it precisely answers inchoate human longings for a relationship with the divine, regularizing time, place, and forms for communication, and bringing the divine down to earth and into the everyday life of the people. It promotes a healthy mixture of awe and wonder, fear and gratitude, respectful distance, and attached nearness that elevates the human being without encouraging a desire for apotheosis. Apotheosis is the making the human divine, okay? Like in Greek mythology. And so here we have a challenge, right? Here's an aspect. I've been able to talk about certain aspects of the Mishkan, which even without a Mishkan, we can find spaces and places that can do that for us as a people, whether it's Medina Israel or our synagogue. What do we do with this, right? This idea that theologically, the Mishkan represented this place of lekarev, right? That we can bring korban, draw closer to Hashem. We're in awe, right? Can't say that. Most shuls in Israel, you don't show up and feel in awe of them. This is a beautiful shul, of course. But how do we get that? How do we find that? Or maybe we're not, maybe we're meant to always feel that no, we have that. It's not in our lives anymore. Its absence is something we should feel. So that's something I want to challenge us with as we go forward in the sources. And finally, he writes this beautiful idea about relating the Mishkan to creation. The tabernacle is the capstone of God's cultural project to remedy man's incompleteness and restlessness. Human beings can be complete and at home only when they acknowledge their dependence on their creator, and even more when they come intimately to know their creator and he them. The creation itself will be complete only when the creator is known and intimately present in the life of his godlike creature. So here, the Mishkan, when he talks about this more in his book, the Mishkan is a continuation, is the completion of the creation story. The creation story ends, Asher bara Elokim la'asot, right? Well, what's to be done? What's next? And the Mishkan is us stepping up as a people and doing our part in the creation process, right? Completing the creation process. Which again leaves open the question, well, what next, right? What next? So maybe when the Mishkan was Kayam and they were taking it down and putting it back up all the time, or when they later had the Mikdash, but after, in a post-temple world, what do we do with these beautiful ideas? Do we just say, okay, they're going to sit on a shelf and we're going to mourn the loss? Or do we take these concepts that were associated with them and try to preserve that? This is exactly the tension that Chazal dealt with, that you're going to see now. Before we jump into that, I want to just give you, we're going to do a little history now of Mekomot Tefillah. So we had the Mikdash, right? Now, when was the Mikdash destroyed, the second Mikdash? Anyone remember? 70 CE. And the first Mikdash before that, right? 586 BC. So and then there was a short time until it was rebuilt, right? So for many years, the Mikdash was Hayam, okay? Now, an interesting question. It's a little bit of a trick question. Does anyone know how far back, here we are sitting in a shul, from when do we know that there was a shul? What does the evidence tell us about from where do we have the earliest evidence of there being a shul, where people went to daven in a shul? What would you think, from when?
I was going to say Herodian. I just saw an article about it.
So what year is that?
No, it doesn't.
Herod's like around the time of the end of the Second Temple period, right? Am I right?
But I think it wasn't
Bar
when
Kokhba
it was
was later.
built, it was a little later that
Okay,
they
that's
repurposed
already
it as a
right.
shul.
So that makes a lot of sense. Anyone else want to give it a stab? Go for it.
I thought that they had, the Kohanim were divided into those 12 groups of 20 or 24, whatever it is. So when their Kohanim were serving in the temple, they were, not all of them, they were in their community.
Interesting. They were doing some kind of service, but what were they doing? Now you're raising a really interesting question, Liz, which is we always think about, this is one of the things I'm researching for my book. We always think about, okay, the korbanot, we had the korbanot, and then at some point we couldn't do korbanot anymore. So came Chachamim and said, okay, we're going to switch this and Tefillah, come to substitute the korbanot. However, when we read what academic scholarship and historians and archaeology has shown, turns out the transition, like most things in life, was nowhere near that simple. So it turns out we actually have evidence. The earliest synagogues we have evidence are in the box on the top of page 2. This is from Shia Cohen, scholar of Mishnaic times and Second Temple Judaism, from the Maccabees to the Mishnah. He shows there are 2 inscriptions which we have from Egypt from the 3rd century BCE. Okay, so that's really much earlier than if we're saying after 70 CE or in Bar Kokhba's time, right? That's like we're talking 500, 600 years before Bar Kokhba, right? No, that's not quite right. 400, 300. So 300 years earlier. The point is, way before the temple is destroyed, we have these inscriptions. What's interesting is, where are they? They're not in Eretz Yisrael. They're in Egypt. So one theory in the world of history is that, well, even while the temple is standing, there were communities living in Galut, in the diaspora. And if they didn't have the temple, they needed a place to worship, right? And so here we have, super interesting, they have archaeological evidence in the first source from Elephantine, which was a center of Jewish life in the diaspora. On behalf of King Ptolemy II and Queen Berenice, his sister and wife, and their children, the Jews dedicated this house of prayer, right? Of course, you always have to acknowledge the ruling government. And the second one was from another place in Egypt. If anyone wants to try and pronounce that town, that's free. On behalf of King Ptolemy II, son of Ptolemy, and Queen Berenice II, his wife and sister, and their children, the Jews in Crocodilopolis dedicated this house of prayer. Okay, so these are the inscriptions that we have from this early time, which is super interesting. Yes.
I thought that the community in Elephantine was a garrison during the Persian period a few hundred years earlier than this even.
So it very well might have been, but we don't have evidence that they had a synagogue yet. And this is what we had. This is the earliest archaeological evidence. Now, what we know is even from the Mishnah, if you look at the Mishnah Tamid talks about the service in the temple. Of course, in the temple itself, there were korbanot, but already in Second Temple Judaism, there were also tefillot, right? So one of you mentioned the Kohanim, even in the Mikdash, would sometimes, one of the Mishnah would say that they would get up and say, there were a few parts of tefillah, they said the Shema, Birkat Kohanim. So we know that there was some aspect of tefillah in the temple, but the idea of there being another place where you could go and worship, right, and have tefillah, this is the earliest evidence. So we're seeing the 3rd century BC. Going to skip over the next source. The next source we have from the Talmud Yerushalmi, and there's a parallel in the Talmud Bavli, which just points out that there is, it's mentioning the synagogue and meeting the prayer house in Alexandria and how beautiful it was. So again, we see evidence of shul in particular in Galut, and that was one of the theories, that because they didn't have access to the Mikdash, they needed to come up with an alternative. There's actually 2 words in Greek for what we would call Beit Knesset, right? What does Beit Knesset mean? House of gathering, right? It's interesting. We don't call it Beit Tefillah, we call it Beit Knesset. So also the Greek words, there's 2 different ones. One is I don't know how to say this. Anyone know how to read Greek? Prosuche, right? Which is it's actually translated as prayer house. Okay. And the other one is synagogue, which meant gathering place. Okay. A place of gathering. So interesting. In America, non-Orthodox, the synagogue, right? Going to synagogue is actually a place of gathering. And this really points to two of the significant aspects, right? Of course, it's primarily a place of prayer, but it's also a close second. It's a place of community. And we certainly felt that over the last few years.
Why was there such a community in Egypt at the time that there was Beit HaMikdash?
Yeah. Well, Philo of Alexandria was a famous Jew who lived in Egypt and wrote a commentary on Torah. So yeah, we had diaspora communities even while, listen, this is the challenge of of the Jewish people throughout time. Even when you can live in Israel, you don't always choose for a reason. Oh, yes. So now with that, I want to get back to this question of, we see that the idea of Beit Knesset, Beit Tefillot was already coming up in the time of the Beit HaMikdash. And what is the status? What is the purpose? Do we believe that in some way the Beit Knesset can attain that makom, what Rashi calls Beit Kedusha, right? Is it a Beit Kedusha in the same way as the temple, or in a lesser way? And if that's the case, where else? What do we think about other spaces and their level of holiness? So we'll see that this is something the rabbis grappled with in the Talmud and Talmud Brachot, and they have a couple of really interesting. We see that there's a real transition in the sources now. There isn't a lot of literature in the Mishnah and Talmud which talks about the laws of the Beit Knesset. But for the most part, it's found you would think it might be in Masechet Brachot. Masechet Brachot deals largely with Tefillah and Kriyat Shema, and Brachot. Actually, just coming off the heels of the most recent holiday, we find it in Mishnayot Megillah. Mishnayot Megillah, surprisingly, is the place where it talks about the halachot of Beit Knesset and also the halachot of Kriyat Torah. So super interesting why that's the case, something to explore for another shiur. But then the question becomes, we're going to see in a moment that there's a lengthy discussion in the Gemara in Brachot about the significance, or whether or not there is significance to a Beit Knesset. In particular, this collection in Masechet Brachot is talking about what makes a place holy, what makes a place of Kedusha. So let's just read a few excerpts from here and see what's going on. So in source 6, We have, what we have here is actually, I'm not going to bring it all. There's actually 3 dapim of Gemara containing sayings of the rabbis. And some of the sayings have nothing to do with this, with holy spaces, but for the most part, each of the rabbis mentioned has something to say. So they've collected, a lot of times because it was the oral Torah, they collected sayings of the rabbis together. So I've excerpted for you the important parts. You'll be pleased to hear. We're not going to read all 3 dapim of the Gemara. And it says follows. So the first rabbi who's mentioned is a rabbi called Abba Binyamin. Abba Binyamin is our only rabbi today who's of this section of the Talmud, who's a Tana, a rabbi from the Mishnaic period. And he says as follows, Tanya, Abba Binyamin Omer, Ein tefillah shel adam nishmat ela beveit knesset. Okay, so here, it's already post-temple, there's no longer midrash. He's saying something quite almost radical, right? And especially as I look around the room, mostly women speaking, mostly women sitting here. And I think about this question, what does that mean for us, right? Maybe he wasn't thinking about us, but you know, I mean, some women make it to Beit Knesset. No. Some women make it to Beit Knesset, and maybe on Shabbat in particular, but for the most part, what does that mean, right? And why is he saying this so strongly? So he says, our tefillah is only heard if we say it in Beit Knesset. Now, here's the fascinating part. Look at his source. Shneamar lishmoa el harina ve'el hatfilah b'makom rina sham tehetfilah. So he says, he quotes a pasuk, which, if you look at the English, is from Sefer Melachim, okay, chapter 8. Okay, right. What's happening there?
In the consecration of the
That's the Beit HaMikdash, right? Shlomo has built the first Beit HaMikdash. And in the consecration, the dedication of it, he says a number of things. And this pasuk is excerpted from that. The pasuk says, Lord my God, you know, it's praying to Hashem to listen to the song and the prayer. And the Gemara makes a drash here and says it can be inferred that in the place of song, that's where the prayer should be. Now here, what's so ironic about bringing this verse? The verse is talking about the Beit HaMikdash. The Beit HaMikdash is the place of song, the place where the Levites sing, and that's where Tefillah needs to be. But Rabbi Binyamin is talking about a Beit Knesset. And here we see the subtle change happening in the Gemara, okay? The Gemara, it marks this tremendous transition, where we start to see the rabbis express, especially in a lot of the Agadic pieces. On the one hand, we'll hear grief and longing and sadness over the loss of the temple and memorializing of the temple. But there's also, as time goes on, especially a recognition that there has to be, right? We can't just stay in that place. There has to be a moving forward. And there has to be a way to also build the future. And so here, Abba Binyamin does something incredibly creative, right? If we talk about creativity of creation and creativity of the Mishkan, Abba Binyamin is also doing something creative in how he interprets the verse here and applies it in a new way, not only to the temple, but to the Beit Knesset. Okay, now we hear some other comments. The next rabbi to be mentioned is Ravin bar Rav Ada. Now we're getting to the Amoraic period, which is in the time of the Gemara. And he says a few things related to the synagogue. Also interesting. He says, Amar Ravin bar Ada, Amar Rabbi Yitzchak, Minayin shekadosh baruch hu matzui bebeit knesset, shneamar Elokim nitzav ba'adatel. Uminayin la'asara shemitpalalin sheshchina imahen, shneamar Elokim nitzav ba'adatel. Takes a verse from the book of Psalms. Here it's not so clever, it's not such a clever reinterpretation, but it's a beautiful pasuk. God stands in the congregation of God. Okay, actually in a way it is a clever interpretation, right? Because it's saying God stands in the congregation of God. What's the congregation of God, right? A minyan. Okay, so far the women aren't doing so well. But we'll get there, don't worry. Right, that the Beit Knesset is the place also for minyan, and also where wherever anyone prays in the Beit Knesset, that's where the Shekhinah can be found. We're now seeing another radical change. If until now the Asuli Mikdash v'Sachanti b'tocham, the Mikdash was the only place where the Shekhinah resided. Okay, without the Mikdash, what happens? This is something that the Chachamim in Masachet Brachot are almost obsessed with. They're fascinated with this question. Can we still have access to the Shekhinah? Do we still feel the Shekhinah? What's going to happen? Okay, there's been all this destruction, this loss. What does it mean? Do we still have a connection? And the answer that they keep saying again and again is pretty emphatically yes. And so we go to Beit Knesset, and that's where we meet the Shekhinah. And then this goes on to say also 3 who sit in judgment, the Shekhinah is between them. Two who sit and are oskin b'Torah, the Shekhinah is with them. And how do they learn that? From a pasuk that talks about as nidbru yirei Hashem, ishal re'ehu vayakshev Hashem. That when two are talking, when two are having a chavruta, that Hashem's there too. So the rabbis also valued Talmud Torah, right? Talmud Torah and Tefillah. This was the new values, the new way of serving Hashem. So where's the Shekhinah found? If not above the Mizbeach and in Ohel Moed, right? So if not, then it must be in these places. And we take all this for granted today, but when you look back at the sources and you start to think about the transitions that happened, it's really quite remarkable. He goes on to, okay, I'm going to skip the next one. It's not so important for us. If you go to the bottom of source 3, another statement, Amar Rabbi Chelbo, Amar Rav Huna, Kol hakovea makom letfilato, Elokei Abraham be'ezros. Now you start to hear, there's also some mixed things, some more openness, okay? Any place where a person davens, that's where the God of Abraham will assist him, okay? Anyone who sets a fixed place for prayer. And it talks about how you shouldn't leave synagogue running, but you can run to synagogue, right? So there's, again, suddenly the status of the Beit Knesset, okay, is a totally different, the Beit Knesset takes on a new status in the world of the Gemara. And the last statement is a little more negative. Amar Rav Huna, Kol hamitpalel achorei Beit Knesset nifra rasha. Someone who dafka davens, right? There's davening in the Beit Knesset, dafka goes to daven on his own behind the Beit Knesset. That person is, rasha is a little strong. But there was this, clearly there was something happening. The rabbis, if they're saying these things, right? When you think about what rabbis are talking about around the world in their pulpits and their drashas, it's a sign of what's on their mind, what's going on, right? Rabbis are talking a lot at the moment about the situation in Israel and what we've been going through as a people, because that's what we're thinking about. They were thinking about how to create space for tefillah in a world where we no longer have the space that was supposed to be dedicated to that, the space for drawing closer to God. Okay. I want to skip ahead to, I want to get to some other things. So I want to just skip ahead to the bottom of page 4, where we see this also a new twist to this idea. Here we have Rav Chisda, Hachi Amar Rav Chisda, Mai Dichtiv Ohev Hashem Sha'arei Tzion Mikol Mishkenot Yaakov, Ohev Hashem Sha'arim HaMetzionim B'Halacha Yoter MiBatei Knesset MiBatei Midrashot. So here we have this idea that that Rav Chisda teaches that it's not only places, it's not only the Beit Knesset, but also the Beit Midrash. And this was something that really defined the Talmudic period. And even till today, this idea of it's not just places of prayer, but places where Torah is learned and Torah is continued. These are the places where we find the Shekhinah. So suddenly the Gemara has this, in the middle of Brachot, this almost detour, right? Where we're talking about this interesting question, why does this come up here? Now, you might remember what the first Mishnah in Masachet Brachot says. What is the first Mishnah of Masachet Brachot? How does it start? Right? Me'matai korein kriyat shema shel Arabit, misha'ah she hakohanim nichnasim la'achol trumatan. It's really interesting. The first Mishnah in all of Shas and all of the Mishnah and Gemara talks about how do we know the time to say Shema? Really, the answer is Tzeit HaKochavim, right? And that's what the Gemara tells us in the end. However, the Mishnah's answer is doing something very unique. It's saying from the time the Kohanim came to eat their Truma, the Mishnah, hey, Mazal Tov. The Mishnah is preserving. The Mishnah is very much focused on not letting go, on preserving the memory of the Mikdash, of what went on, of the Kohanim and the Truma and how things were done there. Here, the Gemara is doing something interesting. It's coming and saying, well, that's nice to preserve that. We want to preserve that. On the other hand, we also have to think about the future. So Dafka on that Mishnah, where we think about the Mikdash as the marker for time, it takes us through that Mishnah into this discussion of what's next when we don't have the Mikdash anymore. Where can we find that holiness? So now I want to take us to a different place when we think about no pun intended, different place, when we think about holy places. Until now, we've talked about the Mishkan, and we've seen the move in Second Temple, post-Second Temple, to Mishnaic and Talmudic times, away from the Mikdash and into other places, central places for feeling the Shekhinah, coming closer to Hashem, worshiping Hashem. But now I want to take a step back and go back to the Torah and see whether the Torah, okay, we talked about the Mikdash, but the Torah talks about holiness of place way before the Mishkan and the Mikdash, right? It talks about, in the story of the Avot, the idea of HaMakom, okay? And here we're going to get into the name of our title, the title of our shiur today. So if we turn now to Breshit, source 7, we see that Breshit Kafchet has this tremendous emphasis on the Makom. And I want to read with you and understand how we understand the holiness of place in this story. So let's read and let's see what makes this so unique. And what is the Torah? We're going to see what the Torah is trying to convey and how the Mefarshim understand this. So we begin this famous story of Yaakov running from home, and he eventually has this encounter and the famous ladder, okay? Vayetze Yaakov mi Be'er Sheva vayelech Harana. ויפגע במקום, וילן שם, כי בא השמש, ויקח מאבני המקום, וישם מראשותיו, וישכב במקום ההוא. So I won't translate everything, but you see that Yaakov goes out from Beersheba, and ויפגע במקום, what does that mean? Not clear. He had an encounter in the place, okay? Now the word makom repeats here many times. It's actually, I didn't even bold all of them. I only bolded most of them, okay? And he has an encounter in this place, and he takes the stones from the place and puts them under his head, and he lies down in the place, okay? 3 times in this pasuk, in case you didn't, right now we know when the Torah repeats a word, it's got tremendous significance. Okay, and he has this dream. So in this place, he has this dream and sees the angels going up and down. והנה השם ניצב עליו, ויאמר אני השם אלוקי אברהם אביך, ואלוקי יצחק, הארץ אשר אתה שוכב עליה, לך אתננה ולזרעך. So we'll skip a little bit, but this is where Hashem, he has this prophecy from Hashem about what's going to be. He's going to have children, and the children are going to inherit this land, all of this land. Okay, and Hashem promised him he's going to be with them and protect him as he goes out of this land. Okay, and we skip to Pasuk Tzayin. Veikatz Yaakov mishnato, vayomer achen yesh Hashem bamakom hazeh, va'anochi lo yadati. Yaakov wakes up and says, in fact, Hashem is in this place, makom hazeh, and I didn't realize. Vayira, vayomar, ma nora hamakom hazeh, ein ze ki im beit Elokim v'zeh shar hashamayim. So until now, we've had only one word to describe the place, HaMakom, HaMakom, HaMakom. Now he calls it, he realizes it's, what is it? A Beit Elokim, a house of God, and Shar HaShamayim, gateway to the heavens. Vayeshkem Yaakov baboker v'yikach et ha'even asher sam miroshotav v'yasem ota mateva v'yitzok shemen al rosha. What does he do? He makes this offering, this altar. Vayikra et shem HaMakom hahu Beit El, V'ulam luz shem ha'ir larishana. And he calls this place Beit El, even though it was originally called Luz. That's what it was called originally. Vayidor Yaakov neder, lemor im yeh Elokim imadi ushmarani baderech hazeh asher anochi holech, v'natan li lechem v'lechol ubeged lilbosh, v'shavti b'shalom el Beit avi v'haya Hashem li l'Elokim. V'ha'even azot asher samti matzeva yeh Beit Elokim, v'chol asher titen li. So he also makes this deal with God, which we're not going to get into right now, but he says, if I return and everything is okay, this is, he's making he takes this stone and says this stone is going to be a monument, okay, a sign that that this was Beit Elokim. I just wanted to point out that that's mentioned one more time, Beit Elokim. What do you, when you read this, what do you draw from it about this language? Why so much emphasis on the place? And what is the experience of Yaakov here? What does this experience do for us when we think about holiness of place and places of prayer, places of feeling the Shekhinah, as we talked about in the Midrashic and Talmudic sources?
we have Asiya here also.
Yeah, go on. I didn't
Right,
even notice that.
because he identifies it as a holy place, but then he anoints it, like he
Mm.
makes it a holy place
Right.
through these rituals, right? By turning it into a matzeva, by pouring this oil, right? He's
Beautiful. It's almost like a like preempting what's going to happen in the future. Okay, now first of all, we've made a lot of assumptions that perhaps you're all familiar with the fact that the Midrash and Rashi quotes the Midrash that says that this isn't any makom. This is HaMakom. What's HaMakom? The place where the Beit HaMikdash is going to be built. Okay, now we're going to see that's problematic in a moment, but but it's a beautiful idea conceptually, right? And that makes a lot of sense. Like he's already, it's a places where he's that he's making this offering to God. It's a Maaseh Avot Siman Labanim, right? Just like Yaakov did that here, we're going to come to do that later on. And so this, I would say that this section very much emphasizes the importance of that particular place, almost the irreplaceableness of that place. It only can be in that place, which this really kind of elicits attention with what we're seeing in the Gemara. The Gemara is saying when two people have a chavrutza on the Beit Midrash, and when you go to Beit Knesset, and when, right, that they can feel the Shekhinah is between them, and that these are places of holiness. Well, which is it? Is it that it's only in this place, or can it be in these places as well? Anything else anyone wanted to say about these sources?
You can contrast it with the Mishkan,
Which was moving. Nachon, definitely. Right. And that's each place was a sanctified place. Exactly. Super interesting.
I see that there's the promises both ways. Hashem's promising to him and he's promising to Hashem. They both have that. There's this
Excellent.
interaction relationship promising to each other.
So there's a number of things going on here, which also sort of which kind of are predecessors to the Mishkan and the Mikdash, which come up as big elements, right? One of them is that this is a place of a relationship between Yaakov, a dialogue and a relationship between Yaakov and Hashem, which is what the Mishkan / Mikdash and what prayer becomes for us. The other thing is that we have this story very much highlights, right, Shamayim va'aretz, right, this connection between uplifting, right, us uplifting ourselves toward Shamayim, and right, the ladder is like the ultimate expression of that, right, that we're constantly trying to draw on that, and that's what this holiness of place is about. So yeah, I think all of that is there. There's a really interesting challenge which comes up in the commentaries about this, which is it's a really beautiful idea that the Midrash brings, that the word makom also appears in the story of the Akedah, right? Which the Midrash here brings, and it says Vayar et hamakom merachok, right? At the Akedah, there too, the Midrash says this and there, it's the same place. It's all the place which is where eventually the Beit HaMikdash is going to be built, which is all a beautiful idea, except that where is Yaakov? Right, and it says he stops in a specific place, Beit El, which was Luz. So how can we say that he's at the site of the Beit HaMikdash? Very confusing. So Rashi, you could little homework for your Shabbat table this week, if you want to read it inside. Rashi brings 3 answers for how to solve this problem. It's great, Rashi, in source 12, and I'll just tell you them without reading it inside. They're really interesting answers. Okay, the first thing he says is that, and all of them are almost like, if you like fantasy books, this will fit really well with the genre, okay? The first one is that the ladder, the Sulam of Yaakov, extended from Be'er Sheva to Beit El, okay? That was a really long ladder, right? And the exact middle point of the ladder reflected was over the site of the Beit HaMikdash, okay, Har Moriah. So here it wasn't that it was being inaccurate, right? But rather that there's this almost like mystical, miraculous thing going on here, which meant that he really was connected. Even though he wasn't there, he was in some way reflecting connected to the Mikdash. Now that's wild, because that idea, which is brought in the Midrash, I believe, which Rashi brings, is really interesting, because it's saying you don't always have to be in the Mikdash or the Mishkan itself. You can be in your Beit Knesset in Alexandria, or you can be in your Beit Knesset in Chicago, or your Beit Knesset here in Beit Shemesh, wherever in Ra'anana, and you can still be, right, aligned, reflecting that it's not always the physical space, right? The physical space connected with the emotional space of where are we directing our feeling, our emotion, our thoughts to. So that's one answer. Second answer Rashi brings is that Yaakov technically was in Yerushalayim at the site of the Beit HaMikdash, but he called it Beit El. It's not like where we call Beit El today. So that's also right. No, no one's sure about these. The third one is a famous idea that Har Moriah was transported. Okay, Har Moriah was transported to where he was. Okay, I told you they're all quite fantastical, none right? But what's going on here is this tension. So what I think is fascinating is that even when we go back to our original sources that talk about one specific place as the holy place in Judaism, even in those places, it's not 100% clear and it's not 100% fixed. And it could be that he really was even somewhere else. The theme, the idea is really strong. And this place over time, this place of the site of where the temple was built, of course, attains holiness from the Mikdash being there and from what and from how we built it and how the Jewish people served Hashem there, right? But there's other ways in the world after that we can also continue. Yeah.
But in this incident, the emphasis is on Israel, Canaan. He's leaving to Haran. And he makes an oath to come back. This is where the Kedusha is. It's not in Haran.
Yes.
So
yes.
it's not anywhere. It's not in Egypt. And,
No, 100%. There, that's something. The tension between. Thank you for pointing that out. The place itself is the place of the ideal Kedusha, but there's also this tension where you can also be There's this dual reality where you can be in a different place and still draw on that Kedusha. Even Yaakov was might have been in a different place and was drawing on that Kedusha. And so we keep that throughout Jewish history because so much of Jewish history we were exiled from here and had to find a way to draw on that Kedusha. And that's going on in the Talmud Bavli. That's one of the things that they're grappling with. Okay, I want to also just say, I want to get to one last source before we conclude, but I want to just say that the word makom in Torah always means a place where we worship Hashem. In source 11, Professor Eli Tor points out that makam in Arabic meant monument, place of prayer, or sacred site. So makom in the Bible means that. Only when we get to the world of Chazal, when we get to the world of rabbinic literature, the word makom becomes the name of Hashem. Okay, in a world where we no longer have the exact makom, the temple standing, makom becomes Hashem's name, right? HaMakom yenachem etchem. Shouldn't have to hear those words, but this idea, okay, makomo shel olam, this idea that Hashem's name becomes the makom is something that we also. So we see that we have this. We can live in this more nuance, in this range of truths for our relationship with Hashem, and what are places where we can or cannot be davening. I want to end with one midrash. There's some other interesting sources which feel free to read in your own time. But I want to end with one midrash which comes up in Masachet Brachot, just to show you again that the Chachamim in Masachet Brachot are really interested in this question of places of prayer, and also in very much preserving the past, preserving what was the way of the past and what's lost, and at the same time building places for the future, looking towards the future. Okay, so look at source 15. This, you might know this. It's an interesting Agadah in Masachet Brachot. Masachet Brachot, it goes as follows. Tanya, Amar Rabbi Yossi, Pam achat hayiti mehalech baderech v'nichnasti lechurba achat mechurvot Yerushalayim mitpalel. Okay, so Rabbi Yossi is a rabbi of the Mishnaic times. Okay, so we're after the destruction of the Second Temple. He says, I was walking in Jerusalem, and I was walking on my way, and I entered one of the ruins of Jerusalem. Okay, so there was ruins. Now we know that one of the ruins is, of course, the temple, but there were other ruins. And I went in there to daven. Now already you should have a red flag going up, right? Why are you going into a ruin of Jerusalem to daven? And in fact, look what happens. Ba Eliyahu zachur latov v'shamar li al hapetach v'himtin li ad shesiyamti tefilati. Eliyahu came, guarded the door, and made sure that I got out okay. And after I finished davening, we had this conversation. Now, you should just know, Eliyahu Navi famously is one of the few biblical characters who appears regularly in rabbinic stories. We have many stories of the rabbis in the Talmud, and here Eliyahu comes and He's a totally different character in rabbinic stories than the way he's portrayed in Tanakh. In Tanakh, of course, he's portrayed as zealous for Hashem and impatient and passionate. In Talmudic stories, he's often bringing a message of the Mashiach coming, or revealing secrets of Shamayim, or protecting and helping rabbis and other characters. So here's what happens. Amar li, shalom alecha Rabbi, amarti lo, shalom alecha Rabbi Umari. Okay, so they have this conversation. Hello, Rabbi. Hello, Rabbi. Ve'amar li bni mipnei ma nichnasta l'chorba zu. Amarti lo lihitpalel. Eliyahu asked me, why did you go into that chorba? And I said to daven. Eliyahu says you should have davened on the way. So ironically, the guy says, Rabbi Yossi says, I was afraid to daven on the way because maybe like passersby would bother me or start up with me, right? So I davened inside the chorba, which, by the way, the implication in the Agadah is that the whole place, it's like a condemned building, right? It could have collapsed on him. It was a dangerous thing to do, right? Okay, so Amar li hayal chalit palel tefillah ktsara. So Eliyahu says you should have davened on the road and you should have davened a shorter tefillah. Be'ota sha'a lamadati mimenu shlosha dvarim. Says Rabbi Yossi, I learned 3 things from Eliyahu. She'ein nichnasim l'chorba, you shouldn't go into the ruins. Lamadati shemitpalelin baderech, you can daven on the way. V'lamadati shemitpalel baderech mitpalel tefillah ktsara. And if you're on the way, you can daven a shorter davening. The story goes on. Va'amar li bni. Ma kol shamata b'chor bazu. Now he's saying very unusual. Eliyahu usually is the holder of secret things and not secret knowledge. Here he asks Rabbi Yossi, what did you, well, by the by, what did you hear inside there? Tell me. V'amarti lo, shamati bat kol shemenahemet kiyona ve'omeret, oy li shecharavti et beiti v'sarafti et heichali v'higleti et banai leveinu motolam. He heard a bat kol from Hashem, humming like a yonah, or cooing like a yonah, saying, I actually have a problem with yonim on my roof right now. It can be very annoying cooing, but okay, sounds nice in the story. Oily, the yonah voice is saying, the bat kol saying, woe that I destroyed my house and burned my heichal and exiled my children to among the nations. Amar li chayecha v'chaye voshecha lo sha'a zu bilbad omeret kach ela b'chol yom v'yom shalosh pamim omeret kach. Eliyahu says you should know. Not just now that the bat kol is saying this. This bat kol goes out every day, 3 times a day. B'sha'ashi Yisrael nichnasim lebatei knesiot ulebatei midrashot ve'onin yehei shmei hagadol mevorach. When Am Yisrael goes and davens or goes and learns in their Beit Knesset and their Beit Midrash, this voice of Hashem goes out in the world and answers Yehei Shmei Hagadol Mevorach. HaKadosh Baruch Hu, when we say Yehei Shmei Hagadol Mevorach, that Hashem, may Hashem's name be great. HaKadosh Baruch Hu Menanea Rosho, Hashem nods his head. V'omer Ashrei HaMelech Shemekalsim Oto Bebeito. Happy is the king who is praised in his own house. Kach, in this way. Ma lo la'av shehiglat banav v'oilehem labanim shagalu ma'al shulchan aveihem. And at the same time, I'm sad, I'm grieving over the fact that my children have been exiled and they no longer can serve me, can eat with me at the table of their father. What is going on here? How does this fit in with the world we've seen until now? This tension, right? Between, on the one hand, the Tanakh being filled with this concept of this idea that there's one place and one holy place where you go and you serve Hashem, to a world where we start to see an evolution, first in diaspora communities at the end of the Second Temple period and into the Mishnah and Gemara, where we start to see that there needs to be a new way to draw closer to Hashem, to feel the Shekhinah, not in a way that erases and forgets what came before, but which takes from it, which draws on it, just like the Sulam, which reached right from Beersheba to Beit El. How can we continue to draw on that? I think that this Agadah very much combines that, and it's able to hold at the same time this grief over what's been lost, that we feel our grief and we feel HaKadosh Baruch Hu's grief, and at the same time this assurance that this bat kol, assurance from HaKadosh Baruch Hu, that we should be going on like this, that there should be this attempt to take that kedusha and spread it into these other places. And I think this is just something I'll close with for what, as a people, we're experiencing today. We're still processing a lot of what we've been through over the last few months, what we're still going through. And I think that this is something we're working on, this idea of how do we preserve, we're not ready to forget, we're certainly never going to forget. How do we preserve the memory and process what we've lost, and at the same time be able to keep taking that with us into the next stage of how we want our Mishkan, our Medina, our people to go forth from here. How do we draw on that and take it to this place where we can have places of gathering, places of tefillah, places of spirituality and holiness in our country as well, be they traditional or less traditional, and bring that feeling of the Shekhinah and that holiness into our people. So thank you all for having me. Everyone have a good night.
Thank you very much.